The night air was thick with dust and silence, broken only by the frantic pounding of Clara's bare feet against the hardened earth. Every step tearing at her skin as she fled the farm she had once called home but had always known as a prison. Her breath coming ragged and desperate as though the very stars above were urging her to keep running. Behind her loomed the shadow of her father's rage, the echo of his voice like thunder in her mind, the memory of his fists, his iron will, and the cruel bargain he had tried to force upon her. A marriage to a man twice her age, a man whose hands had already lingered too long on her arm, whose eyes carried ownership instead of affection. She had endured years of silence, of cooking and cleaning, of bearing the weight of her father's temper, but that night something inside her broke free like a wild horse, untamed and unwilling to be shackled. She had slipped out into the dark, barefoot because there had been no time to grab shoes, her heart slamming against her chest as she darted through fields of tall grass that whipped at her legs, the cold earth cutting into her skin with each hurried step. The moon cast a pale silver glow over the landscape, lighting her path just enough for her to see where the dirt road curved, where the barbed fences ended, where freedom might lie beyond. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to put distance between herself and the farm, between herself and the cage her father had built with threats and tradition. But running alone in the vast emptiness of the plains was a risk of its own, and Clara soon realized she was not alone. The distant sound of hooves against the dry soil grew louder, closer, until it roared in her ears like a storm approaching, and panic seized her chest. Had her father sent men already? Was this the end of her escape before it had even begun? She pushed herself harder, her lungs burning, her legs shaking, but the sound closed in, until suddenly a horse came into view, a dark silhouette against the silver night. She stumbled, nearly falling, bracing herself for the rough grip of one of her father's hired hands, but instead the rider reined in his horse, dismounted with startling speed, and before she could scream, strong arms caught her as she collapsed, from exhaustion. His voice cut through the night, low, steady, and nothing like the harsh barks she had known all her life. "Easy there," he said, his tone almost gentle despite its firmness. "You're safe now." She struggled weakly, fear and distrust flaring inside her, but her body had reached its limit, her feet raw and bleeding, her breath shallow. She felt herself being lifted as though she weighed nothing, cradled against a chest that smelled of leather, dust, and sweat, the scent of open land. She tried to speak, tried to protest, but her words came out as broken gasps, and the last thing she remembered before darkness took her was the steady beat of his heart and the rhythm of the horse carrying her farther from the place she had run from. When she woke again, it was morning, and she found herself lying on a soft bed in a cabin she did not recognize, sunlight spilling through wooden shutters, the distant sound of cattle and wind through the grass filling the air. Her feet were bandaged, her body covered with a quilt that smelled faintly of cedar. Panic rose in her again until she saw him, the cowboy, tall and broad-shouldered, standing near the stove, his hat resting on the table beside him. He turned when he heard her stir, his eyes sharp yet kind, a strange mix of strength and understanding. "You're awake," he said, handing her a cup of water. She drank greedily, her throat dry, and when she finally managed to speak, her voice cracked. Why did you help me?" He studied her for a moment, as though weighing whether she could bear the truth, then answered simply, "Because I've seen too many people broken by the world, and I wasn't about to ride past someone running like the devil was on their heels." Tears welled in her eyes, unbidden, because for the first time in her life someone had acted not out of control, not out of power, but out of choice, out of compassion. She wanted to tell him everything, that her father was a cruel man, that she had been promised to a stranger, that she had run until her body gave out, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she whispered the only thing she could manage. "Thank you." He nodded, as though that was all that needed to be said. In the quiet that followed, Clara felt something strange stirring inside her, something she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't safety, not yet, because fear still shadowed every thought, but it was hope, fragile and trembling, like a flame newly lit in the darkness, and she clung to it, knowing her story was only beginning. The days that followed unfolded like the slow thaw of winter into spring, tentative yet filled with the promise of change. Clara's body healing even as her spirit struggled with the weight of fear and the unfamiliar comfort of kindness. She spent her mornings watching the cowboy tend to the ranch, his movements steady and deliberate, the leather of his gloves creaking as he guided horses into their stalls, the sun glinting off the sweat on his brow, every action carrying the strength of a man who had built his life with his own two hands. She found herself drawn to the window, to the sound of his voice when he spoke to the animals, calm and sure, so unlike the sharp commands of her father. At first she kept her distance, too unsure of her place, but he never pushed, never demanded explanations she wasn't ready to give. Instead, he gave her space, the kind of space that allowed her to breathe freely for the first time in her life. But as her wounds healed, her mind could not escape the shadow of what she had left behind. She knew her father would not simply let her go, that his pride and anger would drive him to find her, to drag her back no matter the cost. Some nights she lay awake, her heart pounding at every creak of the cabin, every howl of the wind, imagining the heavy footsteps of men outside, the cold voice of her father calling her name. The cowboy must have sensed her fear because one evening as the sun dipped low and painted the land in shades of gold, he joined her on the porch where she sat curled beneath a blanket. He leaned against the wooden railing, his gaze fixed on the horizon, and after a long silence he said, "You don't have to tell me what happened, but if you stay here, you need to know. I won't let anyone take you against your will." His words were simple, but they carried the weight of a vow, and Clara felt them settle deep within her chest, steadying her in a way she hadn't thought possible. Slowly, haltingly, she began to share her story, her voice breaking as she spoke, of her father's cruelty, of the nights spent in silence, of the marriage arranged without her consent. She told him how she had run, how every step had been a battle between fear and freedom, and when she finished, tears streaked her cheeks, but her shoulders felt lighter, as though speaking the truth had loosened the chains that still bound her heart. He didn't speak right away, didn't offer false comfort or easy answers. Instead, he looked at her with eyes that understood, eyes that carried their own ghosts. Finally, he said, "You were brave to run, braver than you know, and whatever comes, you won't face it alone." Those words became a shield she carried in the days that followed, a shield against the gnawing fear that her father's shadow would swallow her whole. She began to find strength in small things, helping with chores around the ranch, laughing softly at the clumsy antics of the barn, cats, feeling the warmth of the sun on her skin without the weight of eyes watching her every move. And slowly she began to feel something more when she looked at the cowboy, something that made her heart quicken, something that filled her chest with both hope and fear. Because to care was to risk, and she had spent her life learning that love could be twisted into control. But this was different. This was quiet, patient, steady, like the way he would leave an extra biscuit on her plate without saying a word, or the way he checked her bandages with hands rough from work yet gentle as a whisper. And though neither of them spoke it aloud, something unspoken grew between them, a promise not yet formed but alive nonetheless. Yet even as the days brought healing, the threat loomed closer. Rumors drifted through town of a man asking questions, a man with Clara's father's sharp jaw and unforgiving eyes. The cowboy heard it first, and when he returned to the ranch with his jaw set and his eyes dark, Clara knew the moment she had feared was near. Panic surged through her, her breath quickening, but he caught her hand, grounding her. "Listen to me," he said firmly, his voice steady as the earth beneath them. "He may come, but this time you're not alone. He doesn't get to own you anymore. You're free, Clara, and I'll fight to keep it that way." In that moment, she believed him, believed in his strength, in his promise, in the life that lay beyond fear. And as the sun set behind them, casting the world in fire and shadow, Clara realized that freedom was not just running away, it was standing your ground with someone who refused to let you fall. And dear viewers, if this story of courage, of love rising from the ashes of fear, has touched your heart, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because every story we share here carries the reminder that no matter how dark the night, there is always a dawn waiting, always a hand ready to lift you to freedom, and your support helps us bring these powerful tales to life. So hit that subscribe button now and join us for the next chapter of stories that inspire and move the soul.